Now we can start again. So nothing happened. Really, what happened was I had to reload my Revit. There was a disconnect between Dynamo and Revit, which, okay, that's frustrating, but at least now we know, and I'm not still here scratching my head. So we'll bring up those three items again. We'll put some variation in the columns. And what we'll see in the watch is we'll have a list of three different types of families, which are my rectangular columns. And then we'll bring up the list get item attribute, or get the attributes of the item itself, or the index. So what this does then is we have an index and a list. And so if we bring in the number slider and we just set it at the maximum number, which is 0, 1, and 2, so there's 3 items in there, and we have the step at 1, which if you're not familiar with the number slider, there's a minimum and a maximum, and then there's the step. So if you want to go by a certain decimal point, then you'll set the step right at point 001. But if we're using integers, then just have the step at 1. And once we bring that into the index, if you look at the watch component, it will adjust and toggle based on the number slider. And so that's just basically how to generate a list of family types. What we're going to do is we're actually going to work on mapping out like a grid of points, and then putting these families onto those points. And so we're going to start by going into the sequence tool. And what this will do is it will just kind of create a series of numbers. So we will start at the beginning. We'll start at 0. Then we'll move over and we'll just say the amount of steps that we want is 6, for example, and then the spacing between the steps we're going to have at 10. So we'll put that one there. And then what we're going to do with these numbers is we're going to create a list of point coordinates, which we will do here. So point by coordinates. And we'll go by the x, y, and z for this example, even though we will just be using the x and y. And as you can see in the thing, a grid of linear points appears. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the values so that we have an entire matrix of points. So if we right-click on the point by coordinates and we go under lacing, we can get the cross product of the x and y, which will give us a whole range of points that we can use. And then this will go into our next tool, which is mapping out the individual families to the points. So what we can do is we can type in family instance, and you can do it by point, or by point and level. And because our family, our columns require a level as well, our particular family needs that extra bit of information. So when we put in the family type into the top one here, as well as a list of points as to where to map out each of those columns, we also need to go into the level component and assign it, for example, level 1 or level 2. And then you'll see once we put the watch tool back in and take a look at our list that we have now a range of columns ordered according to their rows. And right now, because I have the number slider on, each row is the same column for every point, which is a bit boring. So we'll try to create some variation, and we'll create an attractor point, and basically we'll vary column type based on its proximity to that point. And so we will go and we'll create a point by coordinates. Again, we'll just go into the XYZ, and we'll go into a number slider, and we'll just say like we won't say anything. So we'll go into the XY just to create that one point, and if you're looking at the screen, you can see them kind of toggle and move around. And when it comes to attractor points, the way they work is they need to have a set distance away from where the point is to where the list of points are. And so what we're going to have to do is get the geometry distance to component. So geometry distance to, and what we'll do is we'll take the list of points that we have from our point by coordinates that mapped out all of those points there, and then we'll take the individual point that we've just created, and we'll put that into the other. And what that will do is that will give us a list of distances that we can then use. But because these values are so high, we'll need to construct a new domain. Now, have you guys ever constructed domains before, like in Grasshopper, where you could remap values? So for those of you who haven't, what we'll do is we'll go to the math tool. Well, under the math heading, there is math remap range. And what that will do is it will take your set of numbers, and then you can set your new minimum and maximum, and then it will have to adjust all of the integers to those new numbers. So, for example, if you type in number, you start with 0, and then let's say you have the highest point at 2.99 because you have only 3 values. So if you go over 3, then it will cause an error. And you set this new domain, you'll see that before in your list where you had 14, 7, 9, 18, now you have 0.14, 0.9, basically numbers that you can use to influence the list index. Does anybody have any questions? Because I know that I said a lot of things that maybe everyone's good? Feel free to just throw questions at me. I'm always looking for them. So, because we have all of these decimal places, we actually need to bring it back and make whole numbers for the for this to actually work for us. So we'll go into again, if you go into the math and analyze, I'm just going to do the quick one. You can get the floor value. Now the floor value basically just rounds the number down. You can also round it up by going for the ceiling value. And so if you plug that number in, you'll see that you have an integer now, which is a list of values. And I'll bring out another watch component because this is truly amazing, guys. You'll see that where this was once just one column type, once you put these integers in, once you put these into the index, you'll have a whole range of column types and styles, and that will constantly adjust based on where your attractor point lies. So you can manipulate your list and create some variation. And that could be very useful if you have like a certain structural component already existing in your project, and you don't need as many, as sturdy a column system as before, and it's just a way to give you some variety and some range. So that's how to map out your families by coordinates and then create some variation within the families. Next, we're going to talk about family parameters and family and bringing up different family types. So We'll bring up the family type similar to what we did before. We'll bring up, we'll just stick with columns. And then you can actually go in and you can do get family parameters. And what this does is it allows you to go in and basically there's a whole list of different qualities and attributes associated with each family. And so when you start your definition and there's a particular string or a particular quality, a material, or any attribute really, you can click on any of these and, for example, the family name, and then you'd be able to start your definition with that particular attribute or bring it up later on in the definition. And so if we want instead to go in and create like a family instance by point, I've got to get used to this whole left clicking. I've been trained too hard with Grasshopper. So if we go to family instance by point and level, very similar to what we talked about before. If we just had a list of coordinates, we can bring up all of those qualities that we talked about before when we were mapping them to the property themselves. But it's important to know how to bring them up in order to tailor your definition and really create it truly parametric. Like there are certain things where if there's a certain quality to an element that you just want to manipulate, then being able to go in and get the family parameter and then get the family instance helps you to tailor each individual quality. Sorry if I'm saying that word too many times, but yeah. And so bringing that up, you can see that instead of just having the family name of the parameter itself, you have the individual column, and then you can select which level you want to get this instance at. And so we're going to go into another realm of families, or well, categories. Categories is basically the umbrella term for the components or the elements in Revit. Family types are very specific. So families are really round columns versus rectangular columns. Whereas if you go into categories, you can see that you have a whole list of analytical beams, braces, or you can just go into like broader terms, like we can just go into columns themselves, which we'll do in this case. And so what we'll do is we'll go and we'll take all elements of this category in order to get an entire list. So all elements of category. And once we plug in the category here, we'll see that we can take out our watch panel. We'll see that right now it's just showing the basic dimensions of the column itself. And then if we take the element parameters from this guy here, which is this guy here, you can see that there is actually like a subheading of all of these other qualities to the element itself, similar to when you go into the edit parameters panel in Revit, and then you can just have like total control over exactly what the column looks like, how its volume, its mass, and if you go into element parameters by name, you can actually go in and you can take the element then you'd be able to go, oh, sorry, that's my mistake. It's actually element set parameters by name. Sometimes I find it's easier just to go into the sidebar because it gives you a nice little definition of everything as well, whereas it takes shortcuts when you do it by the other one. And so if you go into the elements and then you go to the parameter by name, what we're going to do is we're going to just create a string, and then we'll just say for the top offset, and we'll take out these guys here, and it's also asking for a value, which we'll give it the number slider in order to give a value to this parameter. And then we'll take a look here, and you'll see that that as you change this value here, the element parameter also adjusts to these changes. And so it's just a way of toggling through and setting the parameters for each element. And yeah, I think the final thing that I'm really going to go through is just going into the elements and get the parameter value by name. And so I'm just going to follow the same string that I have down here. Because I have a broken up list of parameters, sorry, it's this one here, suggested to myself that I should flatten, but I'm going to live dangerously, so I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to go to my list get item at index, which is what we saw before, which as long as you have your list going in, you're able to get a number slider bring back. That's probably why I had to flatten it. Let's see what happens. There we go. So the reason for that is it probably took one individual item. Oh, so what it did was it took away the zero list and the basically it took out the sub list in order for you to just have one list to go by, which apparently is important for the get item at index because it's only toggling through one list basically and taking all of these parameter items. And so what we'll do is we'll take the parameter name from this guy here, so parameter keep that guy. So take the item, which will then give us basically a string with the parameter name, and then we will go in and we'll put the parameter name here as well as the original element. And what this will do is just allow us to go through the basically show us with the element how many of this particular parameter are associated with the with this particular element. And so that's just a few ways of either taking families and then mapping them out into a grid of points, as well as manipulating and achieving different attributes of elements and being able to kind of take them in order to know exactly what you're working with and how to adjust them for your own projects. So I'm going to pause this now,